Have you been searching for that next level upgrade? Ready to invest into something that is in it for the long haul? Well, look no further than the composited innovations provided by Prime. These customly crafted pieces are handmade by former Jason Johnson Racing car chief and Prime owner-operator Clyde Caniff. Prime Composite Innovations is located centrally in Missouri and is looking to provide that big-time performance at a fraction of that big-time price. For additional information, visit prime-composites.com today to see what they have to offer, as well as their stable of current full-time drivers that trust Prime with their ride. For the future of innovations, with the properly composited type, you can depend, move forward, and rely on Prime. For David Gravel this year has been heavily or halfway scrutinized because Brad Sweet left, went to high limit. And a lot of people don't remember it, but Donny Schatz did or was a beneficiary of a split season. Back in the day, I believe it was NST, when they split off, took Kinser with them, took, I believe, Swindell as well. And Donny Schatz was the champion in that initial split season. And, of course, the asterisk on David Gravel's championship has been a question mark. People are saying there is an asterisk. There's arguments that says there isn't. You're an idiot. And that's where the topic comes up here, and I just want to play a little quick segment of this interaction between David and Donny. It's really good.
That's cool to hear. So I feel like we're in a similar situation. How you said in 06 you won your first championship in the split. I'm sure after that season, people probably were talking smack, maybe saying that it wasn't a real championship. And we have a little bit of a similar situation for us this year with the split with High Limit. Did you have to deal with that? Is that just like fake news, or is that something you dealt with back then? And then did you have a fire under your ass for 07 to make it your most successful season after that?
I don't remember what was said. I mean, maybe at the time, I'm sure there was, a lot of smack talk and whatever. I mean, honestly, when you sit and look back on it, the way things went with Fred getting killed, I don't know that there's anyone that has a bad word to say about Fred to this day, or at least I've never heard anyone say anything. So there's no smack talk that I can remember, but was there an asterisk on it? Absolutely, because it really was a true split. There was a lot of good cars, but it also, if you look back on what happened then, it opened up an opportunity for a lot of guys that were looking forward to go out racing. And I think back then it was called the Mean 15. And I remember guys like Terry McCarl came out and raced on the road and were, and Craig Delansky, all these guys were, I think they all thought that it was going to be theirs to take it. And that's what's always been unique about the level of competition at the Outlaws is it didn't matter who you are. That competition's going to be there, whether I'm there or you're there. It doesn't make any difference. There's always someone that's going to come and keep it rising to that level. So, back when 07 started, we had a great program. I don't know that I raced any different. It was actually pretty refreshing to see everybody got back going down the same path. And I think probably more so than anything is growing up under being one of Ted Johnson's guys. If I'm not sure if you knew Ted or you had the opportunity to race with him, but
No.
Ted
Heard
was
a lot about him.
Ted was a very passionate person, and at the races each night, he was on the radio slinging this thing, just doing things like. So that's what we all grew up around. And it wasn't about trying to promote Steve Kinser or promote this guy. It was about trying to promote his brand, put on the best show.
I don't want to go too far into that just because there's a lot of good stuff there. But in particular, to the topic at hand, Gravel was relating his season with Brad Sweet leaving, just a few others, but Brad Sweet mainly leaving the Outlaw Tour and his championship. Technically, some people saying that there's an asterisk to it. Trying to relate it to Donny Schatz's season where there was a split. Steve Kinser, Sammy, a couple other guys go. And that's why Schatz calls it a true split, because It was almost like half the field, hitters and non-hitters, more than just one, because Brad Sweet was one of the big hitters, but it was just kind of him really that left this year that was a threat for the World Outlaw Championship. I mean, was there anybody on high limit outside of Brad Sweet that we really would have considered a threat for David Gravel and the championship this year? Do we? Do we really think any of them would have competed? Honestly, I think that's not the case. I think Donny Schatz is saying back then it was a true split because you had more than one person leave that was capable of winning the World of Outlaw Series championship. Now he's saying, was there an asterisk? Absolutely. On his own championship that he had due to that true split in his eyes. And of course, that split included Steve Kinser, which was the king of the Outlaws. So the only reason there is any validity, well, there's a couple reasons actually. There's validity to what he's saying to the David Gravel situation is the 5-time champion left, which was, I mean, that's a hell of a string there for Brad Sweet. That's the closest thing we had in this current era of somebody completely dominating the World of Outlaw Sprint Car Series in the championship department, at least. So it would be equivalent to somebody like a Steve Kinser, who's at the top of his game, winning championships, going somewhere else. And in that essence, there is, I've even said it on the show, if there's not an asterisk, there's at least a question mark. You know, if you're not going to put an asterisk on it because it's not Steve Kinser and it would have been his, you could at least put a question mark there and say, what if Brad Sweet was there? What would have happened? I definitely think, if not an asterisk, there is at least a question mark at the end of David Gravel's name. But if you're taking the Donny Schatz approach, it's still, there's an asterisk. There's guys who was capable, or in my opinion, just like I've related it to Francis Ngannou in the UFC, world heavyweight champion. He leaves to go to PFC or whatever. Next guy that takes the belt, it's a vacated belt. They didn't beat Francis Ngannou to take the belt. So there's in fighting, people would say there's an asterisk. It was a vacated belt. You didn't have to beat the champ to be the champ. And that's where I say at least there's a question mark. Maybe not an asterisk, maybe in the shots category or in that way of thinking, because we all don't think the same. Maybe there is an aspect to where there is an asterisk, and you can't take that away if that's how some people feel. But that was a very enlightening situation there, because I think a lot of people don't know that about Donny Schatz as well. There was another good segment. It was a little bit later on. There's good things throughout this. Y'all go check this out. One of the best podcasts or talk shows to date so far in this off season of sprint car racing. I have noticed that Gravel's numbers have been low. A lot of people's numbers have been low this off season. Even Dirt Trackers kind of dipped a little bit. Not sure what's up with that technically, but we're having an issue with the. Oh, there it goes. Finally, there was another segment up here. 52 minutes in, and they were talking about racing back in the day. And I thought this was a really good, entertaining segment. Once again, go to David Gravel's show on his YouTube channel, the David Gravel Show. It only has 2,000 views right now, which is very sad. Like I said, some of these view counts on YouTube have been oddly low. But listen to this segment. It is about racing back in the day. I thought this was a good one.
This has been asked a lot of times, but you know, today's racing, back then racing, harder, not harder, equal, different. Are people more dirty drivers nowadays? Was it just as aggressive back in the day? The overall racing from say late 90s, early 2000s to today, what's the difference to you?
Well, so I can tell you that back in the day when I came out here in 97, you know, Steve was out here, Sammy, Dave Blaney, Danny Lasowski, Mark Kinser. If you drove over Steve Kinser's front end, you knew what was going to happen. He was coming to your trailer to have a chat. I remember it happened. We were at Fargo one night and Darren drove over his front end and Steve was pissed. And he went and said something to him, and Darren I think he ignored him. I don't know the whole story, but we were at the next race at Cedar Lake, and Steve was running second in the heat race, and Darren was leading it. And Steve drove across a corner, smoked his left front so hard with the right rear, the front axle shot straight out of the car. Frame rails were on the ground, and Steve never even had a scratch on anything. Pittman was done, and Steve was still going. So those guys knew how to push it, how to, I wouldn't really call it intimidate. It's just they didn't take no shit. And today you have to take it. It's literally how it goes. I mean, I criticize guys all the time for it, but it's the way it goes. I think it's a lot of the video game mentality, literally. Some of it, no one can, because of the age difference in it. Just take, for instance, a 12-year-old kid comes and drives over you some night. What are you going to do? You can't even say anything to him.
Yeah.
You end up in trouble, or, and that's could be a major problem going forward at some point, but I hope it never gets to it, because then it deters young kids from getting involved in this game. So I don't know. There's times you get disgusted with it, but it's just the way it is. Sheldon's one that I had trouble with younger, because anytime he'd be 10 car lengths from me and he'd just go for the slider. And I think we got into it one night at Lawrenceburg, and I bent his front axle and ended up on probation. And it was kind of out of my character, but I'd had enough. And so 2 weeks later, we were at Knoxville, and I remember going over, he was parked right next to us. And I remember walking in the back of his trailer, and he just turned white. It's like, oh boy, here we go. And I just told him, I'm like, I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. You're trying to make a name for yourself. You're trying to be somebody here. And if that's how you're going to do it, you're going to wear out yourself financially, physically, mentally, and anybody that wants to let you drive their car. You got to find a way to do it without crashing someone, or, driving over them, or whatever. And I started using a couple examples, and he took it to heart, and and actually I consider Sheldon someone who's come a long ways and does a great job with it now. But it wasn't too long ago. I think the last time we were at Lawrenceburg, I was referencing, I remember the night that Sheldon got his whole trailer unloaded at some place in Houston. We were racing, and the guy that dumped him both times. And we were at Lawrenceburg the last time we raced there, and that same guy got Spencer Baston and hooked him and shoved him in the fence. And after the race, Sheldon comes over, he's like, hey, remember that time you told me about that? Yeah, he got that guy again tonight. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So you have experiences like that you learn from. I think that's when you're pushing and you're not exactly sure what happens. There's people going to do things, and they're going to push it past the edge. I guess it's the old adage, it's easier to slow someone down than it is to speed them up. So is that today's environment? Yeah. I wish that when these kids do this, or anybody who does it, not just kids, that they actually at some point had to maybe work on them and pay for it, because that's something that, that's why I drive the way I do is.
Now, it gets into a very interesting situation. He's talking about the back in the day to this day. It's issue there with Sheldon Hodenshaw, but it does spur into a more current event, and that current event does have to do with David Gravel and Buddy Kofoid. Obviously, we remember the situation earlier in the year in Kentucky. David Gravel going up into the car of Buddy Kofoid. That subject comes up here in just a moment. Yes, right around the corner here in about 30 seconds. I want it to gradually go into it now, so we're going to play the rest of the clip here as they get into discussing David's sort of Sheldon moment with Buddy Kofoid.
I've had my own equipment. I've paid for it. I'm paying for it for the kids, and I won't let them do things that way. So, you take a little bit more pride and respect in the equipment. And to me, sometimes in today's environment, it's at all costs, over, through, on top of it, doesn't really matter. But not everyone has that. There's a lot of great young racers that are, making a name for themselves by not doing that. So you just have to have hope and faith that it catches on to a lot more people than it doesn't. But sometimes it's just out of your hands.
Yeah, I had my little scuffle with like Buddy this year, and I felt like after that I felt like changed his driving a little bit, and then had a very successful last part of the season. Best guy in tour. I felt the last part, and he didn't have to crash anybody. To me, a pivotal moment. I don't know if you remember, but the 100,000 win at Huset's. I mean, the 41 drives pretty much to the side of him, and
he cleared him.
Yeah,
he cleared him.
He could have easily came back the next lap, or when he passed him,
right?
Lost his cool, but he didn't lose his cool. He passed him the right way, and he won the race the right way. And he could easily wanted to retaliate. And I think that's what's hard for people is to stay in the zone.
Well, it's funny you should bring that up because what you just referenced there with Buddy at Huset's that night, winning that 100,000. You know how many times him and I have gone back and forth in the last 2 seasons that you go for the slider and you cross over. You and I did it at Texas earlier in the year, and we both ended up in someone else's crash. But you can do it a couple times, but at some point you can't just keep doing it lap after lap. And we obviously both learned that the wrong way, but we wouldn't have crashed had we not got caught up in someone else's mess. But I think, I can honestly tell you, I've had that with Buddy too, where I wouldn't say, I can't really say I got pissed, but I'm like, what's he doing? Did he not catch it's just going to keep happening here. But I'm not the kind of guy that after you do that, I'll just turn left on you, and maybe someone else will, and maybe I should, I guess, to stop it from happening. But, I think you got to look at that. If Buddy hadn't have done the crossover to Carson, he wasn't winning 100 grand. So obviously he's learned something from it. So you got to give him a little credit. Was he aggressive at the beginning of the year? Absolutely. I don't know the guy personally, but I can tell you that night at Huset's, I walked over to his trailer because I saw the highlight video of it after it was over, and he did exactly what I'd done to him 100 times when we were racing. So it won in the race. I shook his hand and congratulated him. And that's the only conversation I've had with him. But you're right. He's come a long way and learned a lot. And obviously ruffling feathers with someone like you that, he probably learned some from it. Hopefully he did, because I don't know that anybody wants to be in that position, but sometimes
99%
he got us. He got us. But that was very good. We'll just end it right there. I mean, obviously you can get the drift there. Gravel kind of filling his issue there in Kentucky with Buddy Kofoid was for the betterment. Now, I said after that situation, Kofoid got a little scared. He stopped pulling the trigger as much. This is kind of, in my opinion, that's verifying it. They're saying it is a maturity deal instead of just firing it in there all the time like Donny was saying, back and forth over and over. You can only do it so much before you pay the ultimate price, clip the Nerf bar, clip this, clip that, make a little bitty of a mistake, and you're wadded up. But it is interesting to see the parallels there a little bit between Sheldon and Kofoid with their dealings with Schatz and Gravel. Obviously, it seems like Sheldon's still out there, up on the fence and making a little mistake here and there. But it is interesting to hear Gravel's take on Kofoid, saying he's one of the best drivers to finish the season. Honestly, guys, since David Gravel's back for another year, and Brad Sweet didn't come back to the World of Outlaws. Surprise, surprise. Some people were speculating that he may come back to the World of Outlaws and still run high limit, but be an outlaw driver. That would have been very interesting to see. That did not happen, but I do think, personally, and I thought it was going to happen this year, but it took a year of maturity. Obviously, Gravel being the teacher to the student here, I guess, in his eyes, to Buddy Kofoid. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, going into 2025 with the current roster that we see with the World of Outlaw Sprint Car Series, presented by NOS Energy Drink. Oh God, I don't want to take over Johnny's job here. I'll back her down, but Buddy Kofoid is the number one contender, in my opinion, to go after David Gravel for the championship next year.